Aloha! My name is Darren Lerner, and I am the director of the University of Hawaiʻi Sea Grant College Program, otherwise known as Hawaiʻi Sea Grant. Hawaiʻi Sea Grant supports an innovative program of research, education, and extension services directed toward the improved understanding and stewardship of coastal and marine resources of the state, region, and nation. This is Hawaiʻi Sea Grant Podcast number 9, Mesophotic Mapping.
Aloha, my name is Rachel, and I'm a communications specialist at Hawaiʻi Sea Grant. Welcome to our 321 podcast. This podcast features research supported by Hawaiʻi Sea Grant. Each episode highlights a new project and the people that make that project possible. I'll ask these researchers to define 3 words commonly used in their research, give them 2 minutes to explain how their research benefits communities here in Hawaii, and end by asking them to provide one thing they know about each other than their research. So, 3 words, 2 minutes, and 1 thing. It's a 321 podcast. We're learning about mesophotic coral ecosystems in this podcast. Here to share their research are Rob Toonen and his graduate fellow, Evan Barba. Let's start by introducing yourselves.
Hi, my name is Rob, and I'm a research professor at the Hawaii Institute of Marine Biology here at the University of Hawaii at Manoa.
And I'm Evan. I'm a graduate fellow in the UH Marine Biology graduate program.
So 3 words that you use a lot in your research are mesophotic, sediment, and modeling. Can you explain what these words mean? Let's start with mesophotic.
Yeah, sure thing. So if we break down the word into 2 parts, mesophotic, meso is referring to middle, and photic as light. So this is a zone in the ocean where you're below the heavy intensive light and you kind of get into this twilight zone when you have a lot of different organisms occupying that space. So this is an unexplored twilight zone area that still supports a very productive, unique biological ecosystem.
Okay, and how does sediment get into it?
Well, we'll start off by defining what sediment is. Basically a catch-all term for particles that settle out on the bottom of a body of water. And so if you think about it, it's all the dust and dirt and leaves and so on that get transported by water or by wind off of land down into the ocean and settle out on the bottom there. And having those organisms that are at depth, the sort of twilight zone organisms, they are dependent on light, many of them. The photosynthetic ability is still coming from the sun, but because they're so deep, they're operating at very low light levels. And if you think about the sediment, it's basically shading them out. And so, first of all, they're cutting down on the amount of light that gets out onto those reefs. And second of all, they don't like being smothered in mud. Most coral reef organisms do very poorly when they get a lot of sediment settling on them. And so corals and the communities that depend on those corals are all impacted by sediments being deposited on them.
So how are you using modeling?
So modeling is a way that we can explain natural phenomena that we're observing in the field. So we'll go out, we'll collect a bunch of data, but what we're really trying to get after is describing a relationship that we think might be happening, that we can test with a statistical framework. So we can have confidence that this isn't something that was observed by chance, but rather something that is explained by mathematics. For our purposes, what we're trying to do is predict where sediments are traveling, because we can only go into certain areas in the ocean. We can't be everywhere around Oahu at once and get data at every single location. So we can use models to kind of fill in the gaps and have confidence in what we are predicting.
Okay, well, tell me in 2 minutes or less, how does this research actually benefit the communities here in Hawaii?
So in terms of the sediment being transported, this is sort of the easiest connection from land to sea, is understanding how land use practices in Hawaii result in the transport of sediments and moving those sediments out into the ocean where they're settling, and what impacts are they having on those communities, and then the ecosystem services that we would like to get back from coral reefs. People want to go out on coral reefs. They want to see beautiful corals. They want to see lots of fish. They want to be able to harvest and feed their families, the limu and the fishes that are coming from those reefs. And all of those things tend to be impacted if there is a lot of sediment being transported onto reefs. Then there are fewer corals, there are fewer fishes, there are less limu.
Yeah, and to add to that, the biodiversity we see out in Hawaii, it's very unique. We're in a very isolated area with creatures that you can't really find anywhere else in the world. And the Mesophotic region in particular houses a lot of biodiversity that is a majority just species that live only in the Mesophotic in Hawaii. And that's incredible. You don't see that in very many ecosystems in the world. So inherently protecting that, it's an important aspect that Hawaii has, let be impacted by our use on land.
All right, well, that's a wrap. But before we go, we want to ask you, what's one thing, Rob, that you know about Evan other than his research?
I know Evan has an appreciation for very fine scotches, and I have had the great pleasure of getting to sample some of them with him over the past several years.
And Evan, what's one thing you know about Rob other than his research?
Well, Rob has somehow had the self-constraint to not start the latest season of Game of Thrones while being a very large fan. It's incredible.
And you're tempted to spoil it for him, I'm sure.
Oh, sometimes, but I never would.
I appreciate that.
All right, well, stay tuned for our next podcast, and mahalo for listening. Aloha.
Aloha.
This Hawaii Sea Grant 321 podcast featured 3 songs: Happiness by bensound.com, Ukulele by bensound.com, and Cute by bensound.com. Find them on iTunes and bensound.com.